thank you very much. Just introduce myself. I'm Andy Griffiths from Calorie Limited, and I'm facilitating today's session. You can see on the screen our lovely colleagues that are here this afternoon as well to discuss this important topic area as well. So I won't waste time by going through that line of people. I think we can see who's involved in the panel this afternoon. But as has just been said, today's topic is technology is not the only answer, and promoting that patient-centric communications by balancing artificial intelligence with a human approach is a really vital area. And I think it's great maybe at the start just to get some open thoughts from people about what that means for them. So when we hear that topic, when we hear that particular area, what are your initial thoughts? And if I could come to Kim first for your thoughts, please.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. When it comes to technology versus human approach, I think it's really all about balance. At Magpie, we're very much about focusing real people in campaigns for real people that tackle really important health promotion issues. And I think if you don't have a balance of that real voice with technology, that's when we really see a downward turn, and we see that at our peril. There's no doubt that technology can support patient care outcomes, but I just want to paint you the picture of the between, depends who you ask, 2 and 10% of the country that are non-internet users. That's over 1 million people here in the UK. I'm from Yorkshire. That's the size of South Yorkshire. That's 1 million people that don't have access to the internet. And if we're talking about trying to get to people with positive health outcomes, how can we do that without reaching out and talking face to face? How do we reach a 60-year-old woman that lives in Bradford, that knows that she needs a cancer screening appointment, that doesn't know she needs a cancer screening appointment, that doesn't have a phone, that doesn't use the internet? We have to do that by going out into the community and by speaking the language that those people speak. And at Magpie, with my language connection, we're actually out in the community talking to people like the woman I describe in Bradford in her own native language, in Urdu, but Urdu with a Bradford accent so that that can be fully understood. And you just cannot do that using artificial intelligence. So I'm very much in favour of keeping a human-centric approach when it comes to these things.
That's great. That's a really helpful starting point. So key things about access, about the human interaction, about the importance of talking and community and culture, and taking that into account as well. So that's a brilliant start for us all there. And I think it's almost a perfect segue into Victoria as well. Would you like to build on some of the things Kim was talking about there, Victoria?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you, Kim, for sharing your thoughts. I echo what Kim was saying. There is a place for AI in translation, but what I would say is I've spoken to a lot of people today. We're over at DP11, and we've had a lot of people come up to us to say, you know, Google's effective. We understand the translations, but we're not getting the patient engagement because there's not been any thought and cultural nuance put into the text itself. Now, if we're looking at really important topics that the NHS is focused on at the moment, we're looking at mental health, and it's a huge. We were talking about this earlier. It's a huge issue at the moment. You cannot have AI there generating answers with people who have genuine mental health concerns, whose first language isn't English. You know, they're not going to feel as if they're really listened to or understood, because there's not someone there that's really put thought into what's been translated. And similarly to what Kim says, we're all about working with lived experience translation. So all of our translators and all of our clients believe wholeheartedly in having people who have had these issues, had this lived experience, actually complete the translation. And I'm quite strong about this at my language connection, is we're really focused on putting the patient and the people at the heart of everything we do, and we just don't think AI is there. I was speaking to a lady earlier from NHS, and she works in mental health, and she's got a community set group of Polish women. And it was about how are they feeling, and it translated it literally to are you flat? And how do you chase flat? Or something to that effect. So we can get the gist of that, but without lived experience and putting thought into that, you're not going to engage a patient subset and group effectively. So yeah, just echoing what Kim's saying there, we're all about focusing on lived experience, and that's how we see engagement. And we worked together on the England COVID Explained campaign on behalf of the NHS, and we were able to localise an ethnic minority group through localised materials that was actually translated by some of our translators who, have been patients themselves. They know how to speak to the subset that we're looking to engage. So thank you very much. That's what I'd like to share.
Excellent. No, that's fantastic. And I saw Sam nodding away at a number of the things that you were saying there, Victoria, because they were great points. Can I maybe move to Sam and just ask you, we've covered quite a few sort of important points there about the human connection and about the importance of making sure that people feel comfortable and confident and building trust. Maybe I could ask you, if you don't mind, what are some of the challenges that you might think of from your point of view at Clarivate?
Yeah, so hello all, it's Sam. So I work very closely with the pharmaceutical industry and regulators and government bodies around the world. And one of the major challenges that a lot of pharmaceutical companies find is communicating effectively with patients through the information, the patient information leaflets, the labeling, the packaging around the medicines. How do you effectively communicate to a patient of different cultures and even different regional language barriers, right? Using a single label for a national country. So what I mean by that is, I'll give you a nuanced example. If we were to use Google Translate, and this is one of the big no-nos in the regulatory world, in the pharmaceutical world, one of the big no-nos of the pharmaceutical world is using an automated translation in order to translate, for example, storage conditions. In some languages, I won't name the languages, but I'm sure those of you who are multilingual will relate, sometimes the language cannot allow for nuances within storage conditions. So, as an example, the word for fridge and the word for freezer in some languages is ice cupboard. If you were to literally translate it, it would be ice cupboard. In my experience, we've translated the sentence using Google Translate. Depending on how the algorithm feels on the day, I'm talking about Google Translate, and this isn't me bashing Google Translate, but using Google Translate as an example, depending on how the algorithm feels on the day, it might translate it as fridge, or it might translate it as freezer, depending on how it works. In the context of your storage conditions of drugs, that makes a massive difference. It's the difference between a safe, effective drug and one that hurts patients. That's one of the challenges of machine learning within the context of language and skills. But there's also other contexts around it. Legal languages cannot be translated as effectively using machine learning, because words like should and words like must have particular emphasis and particular legal implications when it comes to legal documents. Therefore, regulatory and government organizations insist on manual translations as part of their processes. There needs to be some work, there needs to be some evolution in this, but also remember, even if machine learning got to a place where it can tell the nuances apart, where it can talk about the legal languages, language itself is evolving. It's not a stagnant, it's not a stagnant norm. The language itself changes over time, and therefore there has to be consideration on not just what today's situation is and can technology keep up, but can technology keep up with our pace of language change that's happening both at a global level and at a regional level? Do we borrow words from other countries, and does the context change when we borrow those words? Right? That's the complexities that I find when I'm speaking to my clients internationally.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely does. Yeah, and it's beyond semantics. It's into the actual practical impact and implications of getting language right and what that means in terms of the context that we're talking. Absolutely fantastic. Louise, are there similar challenges for you at Magpie as well?
When it comes to communications and our clients, I think limited budget is one of the biggest challenges that we face. So we're constantly suggesting, or part of a strategy maybe, to go out into the community and speak to real people, to understand real stories, so that we know how messages are going to land, what we need to talk to them about. But that takes time and it takes budget. And when you may be working with a client who wants to get a campaign out there straight away, or just doesn't have the resource or the money behind it, then you can sometimes lose those real stories, which therefore then tell you, oh, this campaign would work better if it was in a known language, or what they need to hear, what they need to find out. So yeah, I think for our challenges, it's that limited budget that we face.
Yeah, and absolutely. When you're talking then about the real story and some of the nuances that we get from human interaction and human communication, and the method you've used there sort of hits the nail on the head with that. Chris, what about your perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of confession time, and I think the translation industry is one of the biggest challenges that we have, because we have, as an industry, hyped machine translation for years. We have taken the very real improvements that have been made in machine translation with neural networks and so on, and just taken it too far into patient communications, patient engagement. Engagement is the art of nuance and the intangible, and the machines can't do that right now. So I think we as an industry, as a translation industry, have to own up to that and have to work on that. I think this conversation and conversations like this are really important to recognize that the pendulum is swinging in the opposite direction. We're going back to the human approach, and I'm all for it. So
yeah. So that human approach again. So there's a sort of theme that's approaching in all of this, isn't there? But amongst all the challenges, because it's easy to talk about challenges in a way, because that's something that you can see as a problem or an issue. But in terms of addressing what you might want to be able to move that forward, can I maybe come to someone from Magpie, either Kim or Louise, about what you might actually want to see happening to make sure that these challenges are mitigated?
I think to address that question, we need to think about what's the ultimate goal here. And I think everyone here today ultimately is here because we want to see healthier lives for people. Healthier and happier. Can I go that far? Who wants a happier life? So if we all want healthier and happier lives, one of the major things we can do in this country is to instill better health promotion. Better health promotion and more disease prevention. If we can overcome that, we are going to overcome oodles of money that's spent in the UK on then looking after people when they get ill. And health promotion ultimately comes down to our own behaviour. How many in this room can honestly say they move 60 minutes a day? Stick your hand up if you can honestly tell me you move and get a little bit sweat. 60 minutes a day. Come on, be honest now. Come on, few hands up. Okay.
Put your hand
well
up.
Done, well done. And on the panel, honestly, Sam has today.
Sam's moved about 60 minutes and 5 minutes today, actually, I think, trying to get here on time.
So the government guidelines are that we should all move at 60 minutes a day. And we don't. And looking at you, you all look fairly intelligent, educated people. Yet we don't. And so there is a lot of communication that's needed to tell us to do things that we don't even know we need to do. Whether that's drink less, eat the right food, move more, gamble less, put yourself at less risk of getting diseases. And in order to really, really reach all people in the UK to do that, we need to truly listen and understand what is going to motivate you to move more is going to be very different to what motivates you to move more, because you're from a different background, you come with different motivations, you come with different capabilities, and you've got different opportunity. You might have a park right outside your house, you might not. And therefore, we really, to truly, truly change having healthier outcomes for people, we need to first listen and understand to what people need, and then adapt. And I'm a massive fan. I run a meaningful marketing agency. Then we need to communicate more with people about those behaviour change interventions that are going to work. And in order to truly listen and understand, leading on from Lou's point, we need to listen and understand to people in all languages. And we need to listen and understand where the biggest social inequalities and health inequalities lie. And statistics show that that's often where English is not the first language. So we need to listen and understand, and then we need to be very creative about our methodologies, our ways of getting messages across. We ran a domestic violence campaign across many places in the north of England, and instead of that being digital tools to reach out to people about speaking up about domestic violence, it was actually 5,000 cushions that got distributed around different cities that said, get comfortable talking about it. And women joined groups and handed a cushion from one person to the other and talked about being victims of domestic violence. That cushion was a tool to human interaction. And for that campaign, we ran insight and we listened to what would help women talk, and that's what they told us would work. They didn't say, I want a social media ad posted at me with an algorithm telling me that Facebook, I could go and meet at a group somewhere. So listen and understand, create and campaign, and then share and learn those outcomes. Let's talk about what we know works. And I can certainly tell you that what works for us is making sure that we reach people with a real human touch. Thank you.
Excellent, that's great. And trying to achieve healthy and happier lives, as you put it, Kim, there, is an act of communication as well. And actually it's really interesting because it's not just the words that we might use, it's the way in which we engage as well. It's the how as well as the what that we do too as well. I mean, I wonder if I could come to one of my colleagues that hasn't had a chance to speak about what you would want. Are there other things that would be the sort of things that you'd really hope for, that if we have more patient-centric communication that's about patients, that would really make a difference to them? Either Victoria or Chris or Sam?
Perfect, yeah. I mean, I think we have to go back to, Andy, what Kim said there. It's about understanding and listening to the patient. And then it's about writing content and adapting campaigns with the patient at the heart. And the only way that we do that is by listening, understanding, and then looking at, as I keep on going back to, is how do we then communicate that message where there might not be words within the target language. Okay, so what I mean by that is really when we're speaking earlier about different cultural implications. And we were speaking earlier, this is something that I learned today, which is, honestly, I should already know this. But there was someone that came up to me earlier from the NHS, and they said, it's an important thing that we talk about mental health around menopause. And what she said to me is she's got a group of Somalian women, and they don't want to talk about menopause because as soon as then they talk about menopause, they can no longer have children. And then there's that fear of my husband will leave me to marry younger to continue the bloodline. So there's things that we aren't quite aware of that impact other cultures. So it's not just about the direct translation, it's about what is the barriers of trust with healthcare communications. What are the real barriers? Understanding that, we have to look at cultural differences, and there's no way using AI or Google Translate can take that into consideration. So yes, I keep on going back to it, there is a place for AI for efficiencies. We talked about the challenges. Chris said it perfectly there. I'm the owner and founder of My Language Connection, and within the industry, we face budget constraints all the time, which then some other agencies are then really cutting corners and heavily using machine translation to translate patient communications where there cannot be any degree of cultural implications considered there with what's been communicated, and then we wonder why we've not got engagement and we've not built trust with a certain subset and we've not changed a mindset, we've not had that shift. So I keep on going back to it. I think human centricity, and I don't know if that's answered your question, okay, Andy, but certainly that's how we put the patient at the heart of things. We have to think about that. We have to really think about that. Yeah. Thank you.
And it's a great word, even if it is a neologism. You come up with human centricity. It's a fantastic word because what colleagues have been mentioning there is not just what they might read through a translation, but also what they might understand as well. And that comes from listening. listening to patients, listening to that patient-centric approach as well. And some of these things that you clearly want to have that move on to make people healthier and happier and safer and listened to and understood and engaged, and everyone's feeling more trusted in that environment. Obviously, that doesn't just come that easily. So I'm just wondering, Sam, if you don't mind, if I could come to you, what would you think might be some of the things that might get in the way of that? Sometimes it can be people, sometimes it could just be the processes, sometimes it could be mindsets. Is there anything that you think might actually be barriers to that?
So let me use an example that we have in the pharmaceutical industry, which is, I'm sure all of you have heard of personalized healthcare, right? And there's personalized medicines and sort of this individualistic approach to sort of centering healthcare around the patient. And there's, again, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's this push to centralize healthcare around the patient from a drug perspective. Bespoke drugs for bespoke patients, talking about the patient and all that. So from an individualistic perspective, everything that the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry is pushing towards is this individual patient healthcare journey that we're trying to centralize around. I would say one of the major barriers of machine learning in the most broadest sense is that machine learning is very good when there's very good data behind it to have a repeatable outcome, right? But when this only works when a situation has occurred of the exact same type before. What I mean by that is, I can give you an example. Smoker, lung cancer, right? Machine learning can predict the difference between the two and can predict the outcomes. But smoker losing their voice when they're 50. There's not such a clear connection. It's intuitive, we can see it, there's clinical trials behind it, but there's not enough data for the machine learning to be able to accurately predict and talk about it. So at a broad sense, at a population level, machine learning is great, right? I actually don't have a fundamental problem with it. But humans, I say this as if I'm like, as if I'm not a human. I promise you, I assure you I'm human. I've been running for a while to get here. But humans are very good at problem solving when there's a new situation. Example, COVID. Great example. COVID was a disease that came into the landscape which we didn't know how to react. The only way we got out of it wasn't through computer models, although that came later and we can start modeling it, although do bear in mind, if you recall, it wasn't the most accurate computer models, right? They were indicative, they were very good at predicting, but a human still needed to analyze it and take it into the context of the wider society. Right? It's the same is true. I know this is a very controversial subject. I probably shouldn't be talking about that, but it's a really good example, and it's a very recent example of how machine learning is helpful as a tool, but it's still a barrier when it comes to the individual. Individual circumstances were not considered, right? It was population-wide. There's a wide network of data. My company provides a lot of data to the pharmaceutical companies. In fact, individual pharmaceutical companies are spending billions on AI and machine learning. That doesn't mean their outcomes are getting better. What they're effectively doing is they're saying, based on previous processes, can we have a repeatable, predictable outcome? It's not a case of problem solving. And this is why pharmaceutical companies are classic examples of companies where they employ hundreds of thousands of people. Even in the regulatory space, Pfizer alone has 100,000 people in the regulatory space, looking at regulatory documents. It's a constantly changing environment that needs problem solving and human skills in order to tackle it. Machine learning it can never, I'd argue, and maybe this is a bit controversial even, I'd argue it'll never achieve the level in which a human can assess a situation, or at least, maybe even if it can, at the speed at which we can interact and look at a situation. Machine learning gives you an outcome. You use a human context against the outcome to look at the wider context, and then bring it back down to the individual. So you can say, within the individual, is there an outcome-driven approach for this individual to improve their health outcomes in this example?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, another good example. It's almost like there's a balance, isn't it, between the necessity for having a form of artificial intelligence, machine translation for things that work and solve problems, but for the more nuanced aspects of things, that human interaction is absolutely vital. And if I'm hearing you right, it's almost a false economy if we're looking at outcomes from work that we're doing that doesn't build that into it, because you can end up actually financially even spending more money than you would do otherwise by fixing problems that didn't exist in the first place. That's a great point. I mean, in terms of having the range of challenges and the range of things that might be, might get in the way of that, there are things hopefully that can be looked at that will move things on. So, can I maybe come to one of my colleagues, Chris or Victoria here, to ask you what it is that you would sort of want to see change, if something could change, to make things move forward from your perspectives?
I think a recognition of what Sam's just said, a recognition of that, that machines can't get to that point at this moment. I think also more promotion around the medium in which information is delivered, so not just the language, but also video, audio, the way in which we engage with content, the way we consume content now, which is not, primarily you could say is not by written text, and if it is written text, it's probably subtitles. So I think more promotion around that would be very helpful too.
Yeah, and that point about recognition is a really important one as well. Maybe come back to that in a second. Victoria?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Chris. I think the way in which we digest content, we have to really shift to that and focus more so on producing content and the way that in the modern age we digest that. Moving forward, I would say that we've talked about the challenges. Lou's talked about it there. Chris has talked about it. We've all talked about it. Budget constraints. Also, ease of access and how to help solve these problems at a more national level for smaller agencies, I suppose, like ourselves, that have that awareness to work together in more campaigns. Because, ultimately, you can see the success rate from My Language Connection working with Magpie through the NHS COVID Explain campaign and the statistics there, and how we improved engagement and actually helped to build trust and, seldom reached communities. You can see that actually partnerships like this is smaller level partnerships. Looking at us, we're small businesses. We're regarded as SMEs. Yeah. So we have that agility to be able to solve problems together that are more, sort of a more national level, probably faster than I would say larger corporates, because of the size that we are. We can see spin-offs happening with large pharma companies all the time, where they're beginning to create little smaller businesses as a spin-off of the larger businesses, because we can see the advantages of smaller companies working together faster to solve problems. So I would say taking that forward, there has to be, we have to address budgets, and Andy, you'd said that there in terms of there's constraints around budgets, which means people are cutting corners, quite simply put. But then the remedial work, the costs that go into the remedial work to actually improve, the quality of a poor translation, it's actually a lot more costly than just looking at assigning a little bit more budget. And I know it's not as simple as that, from a national level. I understand that it's really not as simple as that. But I do think we have to think, how do we all work together? Because as Kim said, we're all here because we're all looking to improve patient lives. We're all looking for healthier, happier lives. How do we work together to remove these barriers so smaller companies can work together to solve these issues faster? So that's what I would say, if that answers your question, Andy.
Absolutely, and that requires commitment, doesn't it? From a national level, from local level, from SME level, in terms of how you might be dealing with that yourself. Can I ask one final question then, and maybe it's an open question for whoever might wish to respond to this. We've got colleagues in the audience this afternoon. Is there something that you think either you could commit to from your organisation's point of view, or that you think could be committed to from elsewhere without giving a hospital pass to someone else in terms of what they might want to do? What commitments do you think need, in a sentence, if we could, what commitments might need to be made? Anyone like to start us off with that briefly? Kim?
Is that all right, Lou? I've got a sentence actually for that, which is, and it's
Good.
more of it's a commitment from me, but I think it should be a commitment from everyone in this room, which is, remember that data which is what we base AI on, is human behavior in disguise. And if we ignore that disguise, then we're all fools. And I think we just need to remember that ultimately the human touch is what really counts, especially in healthcare.
That's a great point, and maybe it's a good point to finish on, and it's maybe a great thing to remember. Data is human behavior in disguise. So every time you see data from now on, you know that that is human behavior that's maybe dressed up to be something else. But there's been a whole range of things covered this afternoon around the importance of recognition of culture, of minority voices, of the challenges that we might get around using digital, and also the importance of listening to the voices of people in communities where the language could be a potential barrier, both in the use of words in itself, but also in terms of behavior. Some real commitments in terms of wanting to move those things forward as well. And I think probably a plea, which is hopefully why you're here this afternoon as well, is how you might want to be part of that journey, be part of that way of moving things forward, either yourselves, from which organisations you might be from, or with your colleagues with whom you work. But just from my point of view, I'd just like to thank Victoria and Chris and Sam and Kim and Louise this afternoon for their contributions. And if we could recognise that in the usual way, please, that'd be great. Thank you.